I want to bring you a live view from Kingsport's Eastman Chemical Company. You've been to the Toya Freed Employee Center and it's now getting away. This is Betty Payne with Eastman Chemical Company, their spokesperson.
Okay, so my name is Betty Payne. I'm with Corporate Communications at Eastman, and I want to thank you all, first of all, for making time to be with us here today. Eastman experienced an explosion during a process upset in the coal gasification area of our site earlier today. There have been no injuries reported beyond first aid. We followed all safety protocols to assess and secure the area, and we are working to determine the cause and assess the impact to operations and the business. Since we are still assessing the situation, we may not be able to answer all of your questions at this time, but with us is our Chief Legal and HSES Officer, David Golden.
Thank you. First off, thanks for joining us today. I know you have busy jobs and I appreciate your being here. We realize this event causes concern to our community neighbors, and we truly appreciate your cooperation as we work through the event and the community concern. That has come through all day long. Public safety is a top priority for Eastman, and the company has robust safety processes in place to prevent impact to the community and the environment in the event of an unplanned incident. As you're aware, about 10:40 this morning, we experienced a process startup upset as we were performing an equipment swap in our coal gasification operations that are near Jared Drive. That caused 2 explosions and a fire. We're working to determine exactly what happened and the cause. We're also working to assess the impact on business operations. Out of an abundance of caution, we issued a shelter in place for our near neighbors and our employees and contractors. Those have been lifted. All personnel at Eastman's Kingsport site are doing a tremendous job in responding to today's event. As a result, there were no injuries beyond minor first aid, and the company anticipates no impact to human health or the long-term impact of the environment as a result of the incident. Eastman immediately notified the appropriate state and federal authorities and municipalities of any potential releases relating to the event. Again, we appreciate your cooperation and the support of Eastman, and we deeply apologize for the inconvenience this has caused our near neighbors in the community. So,
this is the information that we have available now. We will continue to update you as information becomes available. In the meantime, we ask that you realize that we're doing our best to get the latest information. We know that you probably have questions. Some of those we may not be able to answer at this point, but we'll take questions for a few minutes.
So did this happen on was this building on the former site of the Primastair operation?
it is off Jared Drive.
Yeah.
Primastair is still there, so it's the general area of coal gas. That's correct.
Are you expecting to take an earnings hit on this?
We're still assessing the business impact.
I know we've gotten some questions from some of your employees wondering about work tomorrow. Can you talk a little bit about that? Where do things stand as far as personnel inside of Eastman and that particular part of the plant? Is it safe for them to report to work tomorrow?
It's safe to report to work. We idled many of the other operations while we were figuring out exactly what the status was. Those operations are returning to normal even as we speak. If there's a specific worker in an area that's affected, their supervision will contact them. But as a general statement, people should report to work.
What was the first red flag that alerted you all to this incident?
Yeah, well, there was a small explosion and a bit of a lag and a larger one. And when the small one occurred, we followed the protocol, and including asking for assistance for the emergency responders to the city of Kingsport, which is a big shout out to them. We have great public response. The Kingsport City Fire Crew are wonderful. They did a great job.
Can you explain sort of what the protocol was with the employees who you folks had to move to keep safe, like what their day was like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a default protocol when we have an incident that we shelter in place. And we shelter in place in places where we've done analysis before to make sure that it's a building that it's safe to shelter in place. And so that goes to the default mode until we can do enough of an assessment and to be able to give the all clear.
What happened to the event you were having today to assess the response? You know, you all put it on the advisory last week saying you're going to...
Oh, he's talking about a test of the HDR system.
Yeah, well, we got a real test of the HVR system as a result.
And what's the reviews?
Well, it's probably a little early to say, but it's very clear that the HVR system worked as the notice went out for people to shelter in place.
Can we talk a little bit about possible, or I know you guys had said there were no concerns about emissions release. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know there were some concerns about HVAC units and with the schools nearby. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. As a default protocol, until we can do the analysis, we ask in an abundance of caution for people to shelter in place, which generally means don't go outside unless you need to and just turn your HVAC system off. After our high-level analysis, we determined that there was not a risk from any emissions.
So there were no emissions released?
There were emissions released, but none that posed a risk.
Can you talk about what type of emissions were released at this point?
It would generally be emissions associated with the process, so carbon monoxide and hydrogen would be two.
What are the kinds of chemicals that were produced in the building?
Well, it's the coal gasification unit, so it's our acetyls stream. And that's the part that's affected.
We just had this question from some viewers, but why do they have to turn off their HVAC system?
That's a fantastic question. Usually an HVAC system works where it's pulling air from the outside, and it's actually safer had there been some sort of emission that affected them, it would be better to keep it outside rather than having the air conditioner pull it in.
I know that we're still early in this process. We need to talk a little bit maybe about state agencies involved. Is the state TDEC, are they involved in the process in this investigation, and where do we stand at this point?
Right. So notifications would include the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation as well as EPA Region 4, and they both have been notified, and they're responding appropriately.
Can you just give us your reaction to this being on the anniversary of the 1960 explosion?
Isn't that a terrible coincidence? October 4th doesn't pass, except we at Eastman feel deeply and remember the events of October 4th, 1960. And as part of our legacy, we have worked hard to improve our process safety so that never ever happens again. Today is just a stark reminder of the importance of process safety, the importance of layers of protection, the importance of quick evaluations and air monitoring, and I would say those secondary systems work well today. Thank you for the question.
And you touched on the shelter in place. It seems like that shelter in place, it happened for a long period of time. Any particular reason for that?
Yeah, it's a great, because I was sheltering as well. It seemed long, especially with the air conditioner off. In an event like that, we want to be triply sure before we release the shelter in place that we haven't run into something that we were unaware of. And sometimes we could get surprised. And so we err on the side of caution and leave that in for what feels at times like a long time, and deeply, deeply apologize to the community for the inconvenience that caused.
So what kinds of first aid had to be performed?
Scrapes. If someone, let's say, fell down and scraped themselves.
And do you know how many people?
You know, we have a process in place that gets a quick head count to make sure everybody's okay. And so based on that, it was low single digits.
Have you folks been able to assess any damage to the building, to the site yet?
No, we haven't. That certainly is the next priority after we ensure that, number one, everybody's okay. Number two, it's safe to go in, and then we'll do the analysis. And there's a question in the back. I'm sorry.
How long do you have any idea how long it'll take to investigate the cause? And once you do finish that investigation, will you release the results?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we have that same question, how quickly can we get in? And that's a bit the balance between doing a news conference where, you know, if we waited a little bit, we'd probably have better information, but that's a long-winded way to say we don't know at this time.
Are you guys concerned about that hydrogen release that you mentioned? That you mentioned that it was a part of that emissions release?
No, it was in a concentration in a direction that doesn't pose harm to human health or the environment.
We've seen the roads close and then open and then close again. Can you speak to that at all? What was the process that had, we can open the roads and now we need to close them again?
Well, my understanding is right now the only road that's affected is a section of Jared Drive. And so the road was open for a while, but as an abundance of caution, we decided to close certain parts. And we know that that caused inconvenience to anyone who was driving through that area. And we're very sorry about that. But it was always driven by our analysis and risk and an abundance of caution. But right now, it's just that section of Jared Drive, and really, it's closed right now just so we can have access quickly to get in.
Our cameras caught some pretty dramatic video of that explosion earlier today, and I mean, looking at it, we were all, very concerned and still are. I mean, would you say that this was a near tragedy here?
I wouldn't call it a near tragedy just because we had layers of protection that should a primary system fail. There are other systems that worked, but just because that was the case doesn't mean that we don't take this very seriously. I saw the same video; it was pretty dramatic.
Well, if there are no more questions, I want to thank you all again for coming. I know it's been a long day. We've had a lot of people working on this to get information to you. We tried to get it out as timely as we could. As more information becomes available, we'll be sharing that. The plan is not to have any more news conferences, though, but we will be sending you media updates as we have information. But again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
That was Betty Payne and David Golden, the Chief Legal Officer at Eastman Chemical Company. A lot of questions being answered. I think that a lot of people were wanting to know, especially about emissions, things like that.
Right. Things that stood out to me for the first time today, let's see, it was 10 o'clock this morning, so we're now looking at about 7 hours after the effect. The company for the first time used the word explosion.
Finally, yes.
And they did say that there were 2 explosions and a fire, a smaller explosion and a larger one, and that matches up with what we had heard throughout the day.
Right.
That first one that said, hey, what's going on that camera? And then it was during that second when we saw that
Then we saw the what we have on video. They say they were performing an equipment swap.
Right.
And that caused the explosion. Didn't go into much detail about that, but that could at least begin to explain. Also saying that carbon monoxide and hydrogen were released into the air, but they say, this is according to David Golden, that it was in a concentration that would not harm the public.
That's excellent news.
Yeah, that is great news. Could be a lot worse.
Eastman tonight used the word apology. They apologized to the community and continuing to apologize for the closure of Jared Drive, which they say is necessary because they need to get in and out of the site where that fire happened. So some information, we're going to bring you more of it coming up.
And right now we are going to go to break and we'll have weather next.